Britain's most famous atheist, Professor Richard Dawkins, said, "Faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence." To St. Augustine, a founding father of Christian theology, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. So is faith compatible with reason? Now, Will, you've written this really interesting book, The Heretics, Adventures with the Enemies of Science. Now, the psychology of this is really interesting, how somebody, and you deal with, with creationists and people into horoscopes and all sorts, past life regression people. We've got somebody of that ilk to talk to, I'm delighted to say, is in the studio. David Irving, the Hitler apologist. And the psychology is interesting that in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, people will still stick to their belief and will just have this kind of filtering system in their mind. It's fascinating.
Yes. So what I discovered was that people decide what to believe with their emotions. So we are confronted by a fact and we decide emotionally, instantaneously, whether we believe it or not. And through lots of different processes, but one of them is called confirmation bias, we will then seek evidence to justify that emotional response. And any evidence that we come across to contradict our emotional response, we'll dismiss it and distort it and say the person who's coming up with what they're saying is just an idiot. And this is how we our beliefs sort of come about, and we become more and more convinced that they're right. But it all begins with feelings.
Yeah, and it's sort of the quest for certainty.
Yes. So people are very intolerant of doubt. So people will have this kind of drive to find more and more evidence to back up their beliefs.
Although doubt has arguably driven discovery in the past and driven science and driven progress,
Absolutely, and I think that, people are naturally intolerant of doubt, but we need to sort of have a bit of humility about what we believe and understand that we should always encourage that feeling of doubt.
So, past life
regression
well, therapy.
Most people think they know about past lives, and what I do don't unless they experience it.
No, sure, but you've said I can't scientifically prove things. I just know they're true. That's what you said.
Can't scientifically prove it, but quantum physics, bizarrely, is starting to prove that the heart has a cohesive waveform. It has a pattern which is replicated, which creates emotion, and everyone's thoughts and beliefs are coming from an origin. Where do your thoughts and beliefs come from? Well, they come from three strains. They come from either ancestral patterns, which are passed down through ancestors, which we call genetic, which I also work with when I regress people to change what's programmed in their subconscious, not the conscious mind, but the subconscious. And then you have past life patterns, and then you have compounded stuff from being in the womb to present day, because you have consciousness in the womb. And this creates your current reality. Even weight is an issue of a slowed metabolism coming from programming from either past lives or ancestors. That's why it's genetic. A lot of people in your family might be overweight. When you clear the emotional reason running on a subconscious level, because the conscious self is going, no, I've no issues, but the subconscious is running another story.
So what's your external proof then? I mean, how
external proof is clients, people who've experienced it, and they change their reality, they change their experience. I don't deny your reality exists, that person's reality. All realities exist, but they exist within different dimensions. We live in a multi-dimensional reality. We live in a holographic universe.
But can you just...
We live in a what?
A holographic universe.
Babble.
But can you...
What? Sorry?
Babble.
Your free will to believe it's babble, it's free will.
I think one of the reasons why a lot of people here probably haven't heard of past life regressionists is that there's no scientific basis.
Yeah, it's been given a bad press.
The burden of proof rests with you. You need to prove what you've just said.
I proved myself. I've done this on TV. I used to have my own show on ITV. I proved it.
Let's listen to Rob, because Rob, the point you're making is kind of a theory attains the status of scientific theory, and if anything disproves it or successfully refutes it, it is no longer a theory. Right.
Yeah, basically, at the outset, you said your heart tells you that this is true.
Yeah, I feel what I feel is my truth.
Can I remind you, your heart isn't the organ that allows you to think and reason.
It does. Heart has an intelligence, and science is proving that now.
Reason is based on empirical evidence that is testable, falsifiable, and
that is Newtonian.
verifiable.
That's Newtonian Cartesian thinking.
Did you interrupt in a previous life as well?
I did. I love interrupting.
Just let Rob finish. Go on, Rob.
No, that's all I have to say. The burden of proof rests with you. You can't provide the evidence.
I can provide the evidence.
It's such a dangerous way to look at life.
It's not dangerous. There's nothing dangerous.
You can justify anything, a belief in anything.
Anybody's experience is their reality. everybody's experience is their reality. If someone's life is improved by the work I do, or someone else does similar to what I do,
Well, that's
then
just
you
common
can't
sense.
deny it,
There's
and they
no
heal
correlation.
disease and illness.
Okay, wait. I mean, Christina, you're a physicist, but also a Christian, but you see great proof of God in physics, don't you? And in the world around you. Although some would say that as those mysteries are unravelled, as we progress scientifically and we discover more and more, some argue there's less of a space for God. But the rainbow is a good example. Oh, God did it. Well, now we know how rainbows through the refraction of light work. So it's the idea of the God of the gaps. Those gaps get smaller and smaller.
Okay. Right. So if I can just sort of set the background here. So let's think about faith generally, right? If you just think about faith in human life. So hopefully husbands have faith in their wives, vice versa. Okay, so that's based on past experience, but you don't know that your spouse is going to be faithful in the future. So you're taking something from the past, which is rational, reasonable, you know, based on the observation of this person as you're courting, and then at some point, one of you decides, or both decide at the same time you want to get married. Once you're married, then you have told each other you will try and stay together. You have faith that this person will be steady, kind, faithful, and you have to keep going. At some point, you might start thinking, is he seeing someone else, for example? And then you can either say, well, I'll trust in him a bit longer until it's absolutely obvious that he's being unfaithful, or you could start setting...
but it's falsifiable, it's scientific. You can get a private detective to find out.
Okay, right. But there is still an element of taking what you know to be true and applying that to the future, which you don't actually know, right? So other examples are orchestras and their conductors. So the conductor has to take the orchestra through a series of rehearsals. You have to have faith that the conductor is going to rehearse you enough in the different places.
Oh, okay. So far?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's interesting. So we were talking about past life regression, which I have experienced, and you say, you know it in your heart that it's real. And I think it's the same with Christians. I mean, Christians begin with an extremely powerful emotional conviction that God is real. But of course, we don't know that God is real until you've actually been in a room with God and shaken his hand. You don't know that it's real.
Absolutely.
It begins with a feeling, and the source of your feelings is your brain, it's your mind. It's not anything out there. We were all the same. And I'm no more rational in lots of ways than you. I'm not saying that I'm Mr. Perfect. We all have these. We all begin with these feelings, but these feelings aren't to be trusted.
Well, I would say
why aren't these feelings to be trusted?
Because emotions, we all live in that kind of... we all tell ourselves stories about the world, and these stories are very emotional. They're full of people who hate us and love us, and they're good guys and bad. And that's how, the brain is like a story-generating organism. It's not a fact-generating organism. So and we become vulnerable to these narratives we tell of the world. And as I say, they lead us down these sort of very distorted passages in terms of what we should and shouldn't believe.
Well, it's not about should and shouldn't. God's... OK, there is obviously a difference. Clearly, God is invisible. We don't wake up and huge sort of face of God smiling down at us from the sky. Now, is that deliberate? Is God perhaps setting us up... If you think about the story of Beauty and the Beast, so Beauty wakes up... I can't remember the story, but she wakes up, there's this bit... And everything's provided for. There's this sort of sumptuous mansion. She can't see who's in charge. It's the Beast, obviously. And she gets to know his character through what he's providing for her, so that when they meet, she understands his actual kindness rather than just judging him from appearance. Okay.
With respect, what we're seeing here is confirmation bias in action. So, you're an intelligent person. You have this belief in God, but there's a problem. Where is God? I can't see him. So now we're actually watching you doing it. So how can we explain this? How can we think our way around this?
I think your book sounds really, really interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading it. And you're absolutely right about confirmation bias, but the point about reason is that a belief in reason, or a belief in the value of reason, encourages you to advance hypotheses, to test them, to reach conclusions, and constantly to test those conclusions.
Challenge theories when those hypotheses become theories.
Faith does the absolute reverse. It begins with the conclusion and rejects evidence that doesn't fit with it.
OK,
that's not true. That's not true.
Julia.
Many people come to faith through an intellectual understanding. They look at the evidence, historical, anthropological, archaeological, you know, the writers at the time, you know, verification, and that's what brings them to faith. It's the intellectual evidence base for faith that then is confirmed by existential experience.
Intellectual, okay, let's just take that, that's
just
good.
a feeling.
Intellectual evidence base confirmed by existential experience.
Sounds a bit of a spurious term, to be honest, because every discovery that's ever been made by science has excluded a supernatural constituent in that explanation.
Yeah.
So
well, that's the God of the Gaps
yeah,
idea, isn't
it's
it?
the God of the Gaps. And basically, I think you've been more than optimistic if you think that any scientific discoveries in the future will contain
What about the human mind, consciousness, which seems to exceed the sum of the parts? We do not have an understanding of the human mind, of human consciousness, do we?
No, not
so
yet.
you're not there yet, are you?
No, but,
There's still a big gap, isn't
however, I would even go and say, even if we could never understand human consciousness, I still think the most implausible explanation for consciousness is an invisible man in the sky. Put it there.
And also,
there's going to be a scientific explanation in the future.
And also, wait, one second. More from the Three Wise Monkeys in just a second.
I don't think it's why do we keep saying it's a man? Why can source, which is just life force energy, be male or female? Why can it not be both? You know, and also
I don't want you two to fall out with each other.
We have the conscious self and we have the subconscious self, and the subconscious self is running your fight or flight reactions
But that comes
to what
from within.
you do.
It's not driven by an external
by your past
force.
life programming.
No, it's not driven by an external force.
No,
humanity and
it's an
understanding
inner
consciousness
force.
Comes from within us.
Life is
That's
from
what we need
in
to
with you.
understand.
There's nothing out there. It's inside you.
But I would say that
John Paul II said, faith and reason, I'll put this to you, Oliver, faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth.
Well, I mean, I've used the word again.
Discuss.
It's complete babble. Martin Luther was much closer to the mark when he said that reason was the greatest enemy a Christian faced, and that Christians should pluck out the eye of reason. Of course, the tragedy of that quotation is that he recognised that reason was a way of seeing things.
Do you think that anyone there in this studio, for example, watching at home, who has faith is being illogical?
I think it's difficult. I think people who have faith can begin from a position that says faith is the primal thing, the most important thing, and then they can reason within that. But I've argued before, I just argued that actually faith and reason are diametrically opposed because one starts with a conclusion and one starts with a premise.
No. The greatest mathematician who ever lived, Sir Isaac Newton, said just a thumbprint alone, and the fact there are no two thumbprints in the world that are identical, is enough to persuade him for there to be a creator God. Because the probability is so infinitesimal for just that one fact. That's what led him to his...
Some of the world's leading evolution. Some of the world's leading evolution biologists are Christians. You know, Ayala and Ken Miller and Watson. You know, they see wonderful things in, for example, the natural processes of evolution. It's not exclusive, and it was Stephen Jay Gould who spoke of the non-overlapping magisteria of science and faith. They are compatible. They work together. It's like the idea of the wings. You don't buy that.
No, I don't. I think it's very difficult for me to reconcile evolution and faith because we now have to believe that God sort of twiddled his thumbs for billions of years waiting for evolution to deliver the human masterpiece. The reason why evolution has been accepted by faith is because of the dwindling intellectual integrity of religion. They've been forced to sort of offer...
The Church of England accepts it, the Catholic Church accepts it, most mainstream religions accept it.
Because the evidence is so strong.
It was a debate we did a few weeks ago, very interesting, about religion. So it's not just evolution, there are other aspects of science as well, aren't there?
Indeed, yeah. I think it's just clutching at straws. I think it's having your cake and eating it, to be honest, because it doesn't stack up to sort of tally the two. But it's just a means to sort of, as Oliver said, it's just to start with that truth. There must be a God. We must find a way to link that evidence back to God. Yeah, and it doesn't stack up.
Yeah, but OK, it's not just the natural world. I mean, for a start, we've got people claim, well, Jesus came 2,000 years ago, and the idea is that he was actually God in human form, showing us what God was like.
So do you think if he'd had a DNA test, half of his DNA would have been untraceable?
I don't know.
Because half came from his mother.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah, scientifically.
I don't know.
It was all divine.
love
So all this DNA was... No, half your DNA is from your mother, half's from your father.
But it might not
if
have been, I guess.
But it was
But
immaculate
IVF.
conception. It's all divine. It's just that she carried the baby.
Right.
Yeah, we don't know, do we?
Right.
I mean,
What if we are all God and the goddess?
Good.
What if I love all the prophets equally? I think they're all fabulous, but Buddha,
all right.
Muhammad,
They're all
Jesus,
right, and
Allah,
everything
they're
they say is
all
true.
right. But we, man, have distorted it to beseech this
Okay.
external deity,
Yeah.
which isn't
Yeah,
true.
you like that? Yes, sir. What would you like to say?
I think we were starting from the wrong point. In terms of faith and how faith is defined, is based on conjecture, based on doubt. This is a general definition. From an Islamic perspective, the definition of faith or belief is what convinces the mind, then settles in the heart, and is followed then in the action. So the point I'm making, the way to belief is intellectual. It's an intellectual journey. And what you find when you're talking about reason and ration, particularly using reality, you will find that actually that this is very compatible with religion. In fact, it actually leads you to belief of the Creator. Another point that's been made, we keep talking about gods and almost in a sort of the human form. Whereas first we should be looking at the Creator and starting from that premise, coming to the point of a Creator that is eternal and that everything is limited and dependent on the Creator.
Rather than an anthropocentric God.
This gentleman has just described confirmation bias. Again, it begins in the heart and then we go on a journey. The problem with that journey is it's a distorted journey.
But the thing about the Quran is that the Quran has some very strong edicts within it and recommendations to seek knowledge.
Yes,
and to...
yes, but the problem is with that, we feel as if we're seeking knowledge. This has been demonstrated, this is confirmation. So we feel as if we're having a rational, reasonable exploration of the facts, but we're not. We're just confirming what the heart has told us in the first place. That's the problem with
Okay,
faith.
fine.
And that's why all
in
realities exist.
Sorry. No, in science, the same thing happens. I'm sorry. But, you know,
I agree.
scientist
I agree.
has a hypothesis. You know, it might be a PhD student that's given an idea by a supervisor, and he says, right, go away and see if this is true. Right, so you start with a premise. And I think with God, it is a bit impossible to extrapolate and find out what God is just from reason alone. I think God has to come as Jesus, as the Holy Spirit in our lives, and so on. But does that mean it's not true?
I agree to an extent that you know, of course, scientists aren't free of these problems as well. But you know, the scientific method is the method by which we've come across to actually destroy the processes of confirmation bias, destroy anecdote, destroy emotion. It's not a perfect system, and you're still going to get very eminent scientists completely disagreeing on what the data says. But it's a brilliant and largely successful attempt.
When Einstein's theory of relativity came along, everyone had to think again, and everything changed. Wasn't it all? Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you for that. We're all God. That's the message we take from it. Now, if you've got something to say about that debate, log on bbc.co.uk/thebigquestions. Follow the link to the online discussion. Send us your views about our last big question.